Mobility training has become one of the most in-demand methods in the past decade. But how did we get here? In this episode, I take you through the events that led us to where we are today, and posing questions that challenge the direction we're going and provide you with a practical outlook to consider. Okay, today we're diving into the growth and popularity of mobility training in the past 2 decades. And some of you listening today are not old enough to remember when it started, or maybe you thought it was always a thing, but mobility training really didn't start coming forward until the mid-2000s. I started personal training back in 2005, and it was around this time that the industry really started to shift. The 80s had taken us into a commercial gym era where user-friendly machines and bodybuilding was all the craze. I don't remember anyone at the time actually requesting mobility training or really knowing what that was. When I reflect on a lot of the clients that I was working with at the time, a lot of the goals were very health and movement driven anyway. So in a way, we were already doing mobility training, but it wasn't really a thing. And if you think about the many different approaches that you can take to train someone through a full range of motion, this was certainly the case. The growth of functional training was heavy on the rise, and we started seeing training methods like CrossFit hit the scene, and they were bringing back these old school foundations of weightlifting, gymnastics, and conditioning, things that just weren't really being considered as much during those early years. Then in 2006, Warner Brothers released a blockbuster movie called 300, which I believe was a pinnacle turning point in the fitness industry. I went and saw this movie with my friends in IMAX, and it was literally like 2 hours of just like shredded Spartan abs in your face, yielding swords, destroying their enemies, and laughing in the face of battle. And coming out of that, it was this shift where just like everyone just wanted to be a Spartan. Everyone wanted to train and move their bodies and just kind of break away from the machine. But to even begin to figure out how to start training like this, you had to go to the source to figure out who was it that got these individuals in that shape for that movie. Mark Twight, who was well known at the time for his mountaineering and climbing, he had started an invite-only gym called Jim Jones, and it was very raw, broken down kind of Spartan-like training. They were lifting stones, they were flipping tires, throwing sledgehammers, climbing ropes. It was pretty intense, and he was the one that had worked with the stars of this movie to get them in that shape. I remember having access to the Jim Jones website at the time, where there was daily workouts posted, 2-a-day workouts, heavy intense conditioning. Sometimes there was 2 or 3 Metcons, which is the CrossFit type circuits where you're completing things for time or task. Sometimes there was 2 or 3 of those in one workout. It was just absolute insanity. This, of course, helped CrossFit take it to the next level in hosting their first CrossFit Games in 2007. Now, not only did we all want to become Spartans, but we had a reason to train for it. This was followed by growth and popularity of obstacle course racing, which one of the most popular ones was actually named after Spartans, the Spartan race. From a trainer's perspective, you now had all of these clients coming to you and wanting to do all of these things that they hadn't been doing. They wanted to be more human. But the problem was that no one could move well. Being machine driven, the era at the time, it was a machine focused kind of training era, but it was also kind of a bubble wrapped era where, you know, the theme was not to move the knees over the toes, not to move weight overhead, not to use your back to lift things. So it was such a big shift that we needed to find a way to ease these people back into this way of moving. And this was when the term mobility training started to pop up. And a lot of the motivation behind calling it mobility training was that it helped us focus around this new goal that everyone had of just moving better. So how do we train now to move better? How do we break away from these commercialized machines and get out and move again? New systems started to pop up pioneered by Kelly Starrett, which this is around the time that he published the Supple Leopard, which if you're familiar with this, it kind of lays out framework of like moving and becoming more mobile again. This was also followed by mobility training approaches by functional range conditioning, which is spearheaded by Andros Spina. We saw this growth in popularity of a new style of training that was called movement training. A lot of locomotion work. People were moving like animals. Ido Portal method actually came about during this time, and Ido Portal presented us ways of flowing through space and environment. He called this Florio, which if you do investigate that a bit further, it had a lot of background in martial arts and in areas like capoeira, where you actually learn to move around in a space and explore your body in a lot of unique ways. All of these things at the time were so good for the industry, but it of course led to a new debate, and that being that mobility training was better and more needed than flexibility training, and that flexibility training was a waste of time. Like most things, this was a very extreme perspective, and it relied heavily on one specific type of flexibility training, which is passive flexibility training, passive stretching, which is the use of flexibility exercises in a very relaxed state, which when I think about it, I do agree with this. This wouldn't be the solution for someone that's wanting to learn how to move better, create stability in their body in a lot of these big positions or vulnerable positions that they haven't been exposed to before. But it does isolate only one area of flexibility specific training. And this is where we start to get some confusion. When we isolate flexibility training just to passive ranges of motion, we completely neglect the other forms of flexibility training, specifically static active and dynamic active flexibility. Static active flexibility can be things like positional isometrics, and dynamic active flexibility are things like moving through full range of motion, which if you think about that, it really is the sum of what mobility training is. So should we have just called it flexibility training? When I look back, I think it was a good thing for us to call it mobility training. We were feeding off the excitement of everybody that wanted to start moving better again. And there still is a barrier of entry when we talk too much about flexibility. It does confuse people because they think only of the expression of flexibility, not necessarily the form of it. So I think in us now trying to show people how we are going to get them moving better, calling it mobility training helped thrive off this new excitement of wanting to do something different. As we move into what I think is another shift in the industry, we're starting to come off the back end of all this excitement of mobility training and realize that it does offer us a lot of new tools to work with when trying to move better and improve our ranges of motion, but it doesn't have to be a separate modality. We can bring back these two worlds of just training structurally sound as we were doing before all of this kind of hit with some new tools. And I think that you're seeing a lot of people start to do this again, where the excitement of a new idea or a new thought, it gets us wanting to dive in very deep to get its full understanding. There's a lot of things there that have always been there. We just stopped doing them. Flexibility training has been around for hundreds of years, and a lot of these techniques that are considered new have already been used in the past. We just stopped using them. We got a little too attached to the machine and kind of forgot how to be human. There's a fine line, there's a fine balance there. Machines are great, moving your body is great. Combining the both and moving yourself towards your fitness goals is ultimately what I think is the end result. So thank you for joining me for this episode, just discussing about how mobility training has evolved into what it is today. I am interested in hearing your perspectives and maybe experiences with some of the things that I've discussed. If there's anyone that you think would resonate with this or needs to hear this, Please feel free to share that and subscribe if you haven't for more topics on unconventional strength and flexibility.